Lunch. I'm John Milbrath, Board Chair of the Bellevue Chamber. So glad to have this opportunity for us to gather to hear from Brent Beardall, CEO of Washington Federal. Last year, Brent provided us with a mid-year economic forecast, and he's returned to highlight the outlook for the economy in this very unusual time that we're all living through. I'd like to start by thanking the Bellevue Chamber Lunch Series sponsors, the Bellevue Collection, Vulcan Real Estate, and AAA Washington. I'd also like to thank our lunch leaders, Sweeney Conrad and Clark Newber. This is the final in the series of 8 that were made possible through the generous support of our sponsors. And our 2019-2020 lunch program was a huge success for the Chamber and the Bellevue community. As you can see, we packed the Westin Ballroom to hear from influential leaders in business and government, including the CEOs of Nintendo and Puget Sound Energy, the top leaders at the University of Washington, Sound Transit, and SeaTac Airport. This was a record-breaking year for attendance, and while we end this year's series virtually, it's exciting to see well over 500 people registered for today's program. If you've missed any of our great webcasts for any of our series, you can watch them anytime on demand at bellevuechamber.org/webcast. Over the last several weeks, our chamber team has been servicing as the distribution hub for PPE, personal protection equipment for Eastside businesses and residents. In addition to our fantastic chamber staff, there were 4 chamber members who stepped up to serve as distribution locations. A big thank you to Salvation Army, Tutabella, Bellevue Embroidery, and the Bellevue Farmers Market, along with the help of our chamber ambassadors, Randa Hoffman, Edward Jones, Van Cooper, Windermere, Stacy Anderson, Tutabella, Kevin Chang, Voya Financial, Daniel Pulse, Pulse Consulting, Aaliyah Maliza, Cascade Pest Control, and Evelyn Hu from Bellevue Embroidery. On Tuesday, Nancy and a couple of the ambassadors, alongside an Amazon treasure truck at the Bellevue Church, helped distribute PPE supplies to 150 businesses coordinated by One Redmond, Seattle Metropolitan Chamber, Southside Seattle Chamber, and King County. The total of businesses, residents, and specific amounts of masks and sanitizer has been distributed in the area is staggering. 950 businesses, 82,000 disposable, and 38,000 cloth masks, plus 3,500 bottles of sanitizer have been distributed by this great team. 80,000 cloth masks to Bellevue residents alone. So please help me in thanking our team and all the volunteers for the unbelievable number of hours spent in this very critically important project. Also, I'd like to recognize the members who have renewed their membership over this challenging time. We know this has been a challenge for everyone. Please take a look at this incredible list. And there's never been a more important time to be a member of the Bellevue Chamber. The Chamber is your gateway to Eastside business and civic leaders, educational programming, visibility, promotional opportunities, and community service and impact. If you're interested in joining us for our 2020-2021 season, please click the pop-up on your screen to connect with our chamber staff. They would love to talk to you about being a member of the Bellevue Chamber. Now I'd like to introduce the President and CEO of the Bellevue Chamber, Joe Fain. Joe?
Thanks so much, John, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. I'm very pleased to have such a great crowd. We had over 500 folks that were registered for today's program, and it's just really an outstanding opportunity here from such a great speaker. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow morning as we explore the latest in artificial intelligence, deep learning, manufacturing, and robotics with Gardeep Singh Paul, Corporate Vice President at Microsoft, for our Future of Work Leadership Conference. It is a great opportunity to hear from some of the best minds in the future of work and in the business, technology business here locally. Go ahead and click that pop-up on your screen to get registered. We also have a summer packed full of webcast programming, and next Wednesday, July 29th at 3 p.m., we will be joined by King County Assessor John Wilson as he discusses the economic impacts of COVID on businesses, as well as how property taxes will be affected by the pandemic. As you heard from John, we've had a very busy summer with more exciting virtual events, programs, and impact initiatives underway. We launched our summer internship program to tremendous success. Our Bellevue Chamber interns are working on advocacy, marketing, member outreach, PPE distribution, supporting our robust committee projects, and updating our new member database. We're always looking for more talented high school and college-age leaders to join us. And while we have have a few that have chosen in-person work, the majority of our interns are 100% virtual. So if you know a student that is interested in getting involved, please contact Kim Fredericks at the link on your screen. Finally, before we welcome our next speaker, I want to encourage everyone to share your experiences on today's program over Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. We'll be monitoring our social media, looking for posts from today's program, and every post that you make will enter you into a drawing to win an Amazon Echo Dot. We'll select the winner following today's program, so post early and often. And to help you out, just click the pop-up on your screen to easily post to Twitter. Now, I'd like to welcome one of the Chamber's newest incoming board members and the Senior Vice President and Area Manager for HDR, Karen Doherty. Karen will introduce today's keynote speaker and will then return to moderate the question and answer portion of today's program. So in preparation, please use the chat and Q&A tab on your screen to submit your questions on the state of the economy. For now, please welcome Karen Doherty.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So first, a little bit about HDR. We are a 10,000-person employee-owned consulting firm. We just celebrated our 100 year of service. We're a global full-service architecture, engineering, and construction management firm. In Washington State, we have over 500 employee owners in 8 offices across the state. A few of our local projects in the Puget Sound area include the SR 520 floating bridge, the East Link light rail expansion, and Bellevue's Factoria transfer station. We like to say we build projects in places where our employee owners call home. We have given back locally through volunteer work at HopeLink and local school STEM groups. So I'm a proud member of the Bellevue Chamber and happy to serve on the board. So now let's get on to our presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Brent Beardall. Brent is the president and CEO of Washington Federal, a national bank headquartered in Seattle. The company manages $16 billion in assets and 320 offices located in 8 Western states. It's unique in its approach of, number one, never selling its loans, and secondly, providing technology that makes banking simple, reliable, and fast. In April 2017, Brent became the 6th CEO in the bank's 100-year history. He joined Washington Federal in 2001 and previously served as its controller, CFO, and chief banking officer. His challenge to all Washington Federal employees is to love what you do and to make a difference. Brent, welcome.
Karen, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's great to be here again. I only wish we could be together in person. It's something that I really miss as we go through this pandemic together. Our worlds have clearly changed. But first things first, I don't know if you can see this, but I was this morning down with Mr. Lewicki and very excited to have the formal announcement of the name of our NHL team, the Seattle Kraken. So really exciting there. My first slide, just some of the quick highlights about our bank. And we feel so very fortunate to be headquartered in Washington, in the largest bank in the state. And we announced earnings just last night. And one of the highlights of our earnings announcement was this year we have been able to grow transaction deposit accounts by $1.8 billion or 26%. And so to all of you that are our clients, I just want to say thank you for the vote of confidence. We are very excited about where we are and where we're going in our future here in Western Washington and in our 8 states. As Karen mentioned, kind of what we think the keys to our success, our strategy, what will enable us to survive for another 100 years are pretty simple. Number one, it's relationships. Relationships matter. As you know, in your business, it's more than just internet connection or a phone app. You need to have relationships with your bankers. And I think we have some fantastic bankers. Fiscal conservatism. Bellevue is known for many of your leaders that are fiscally conservative, and that is exactly in line with our bank. We're one of the safest banks in terms of capital and asset quality. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that really enables us to work with our clients through the good and bad times. And lastly, technology. And some of you may be smiling a little bit. We historically have not been known for our robust technology, but we're making significant investments. And I think making some great strides. And so that's kind of the keys to our success. Boy, how the world has changed from a year ago when we sat down together. Many of us thought that this bull cycle in the economy would end at some point, but I don't think there were any of us that predicted when or how it was going to end with another pandemic, the second time in 100 years, or when that was going to happen. I was looking through my notes of my presentation last time, and I think I said something to the effect that we are living in a Camelot world. We should enjoy it, but we should get ready for it to be over. It will not last. And I think that has proven to be true. So I'm going to change things up a little bit. Most economic presentations you see focus on a lot of charts and graphs and then saves the conclusions for the end. And I'm going to change it up and go with my conclusions at the get-go and then support it with some charts and graphs at the end. And all of these charts will be made available for you through the Bellevue Chamber. So if someone were to ask me what makes me most nervous, I've got a list here. Number one is clearly COVID-19 and the resurgence. And what is both the human toll of that, if that does in fact happen, as it looks to be, and the economic fallout of another shutdown. Many of you probably can talk better about the human toll and what happens and why this virus is spreading the way it is. So I will focus more on the economic fallout. And I would say we have many small businesses that have literally been brought to their knees by this shutdown that has happened and the change in behavior. But on the other side, we also have many businesses that are thriving. Those in the e-commerce world, for example, are absolutely thriving during this pandemic. So it's really a tale of two different worlds in terms of the economic environment. And what I worry about most is there are a lot of small businesses that took really a very difficult punch, if you will, from the first shutdown. And then what happens if we have another shutdown? Those businesses were able to survive because of government programs, the PPP, so forth, dipping into savings, and they were just barely able to survive. So if we have another shutdown, I think we could see far more in terms of the way of bankruptcy of small businesses, which I think would be a very bad thing. Next is jobs. I was very bullish on our economy, and the reason I was bullish is because of our jobs, the number of jobs that we've been able to produce in this region, and not only the number of jobs, but the type of jobs, the very highly skilled, highly paid jobs that we have in our technology field. But it is staggering to see the number of job losses. On a net basis through this year, we have lost 250,000 jobs in the state of Washington. So my question is, number one, can we recover those lost jobs? And number two, if so, how long will it take? And so those are questions that need to be answered, and we really need the economy to pick back up again so we can fill those jobs. I do worry as the world has changed, as we're into this new norm, if all of those jobs will come back. You look at some of the industries, cruises, for example. You know that the cruise ship industry has absolutely been decimated. Think of all the people that worked on that cruise ship and in that cruise ship industry, both in management and on the ships themselves. When will those come back? And I know most of us hope that sooner rather than later, but that's a great unknown at this point. Number three that makes me nervous, that keeps me up at night, is our national debt and the interest rate risk associated with it. So as of today, our national debt stands at $26.5 trillion. It is a staggering number. And then associated with that is the interest rate risk. So if interest rates were to go up, and I know we're at an uber low interest rate environment, but if interest rates were to go up even 100 basis points, which is 1%, that would mean an additional $265 billion per year in interest expense that we as the United States and our government would have to pay. So that concerns me a great deal. At some point, do other countries and even our own citizens stop buying our own debt because it has ballooned so much? Number 4 is commercial real estate. One of the huge drivers that we have seen in our economy over the last 10 years has been the construction industry. And many of those construction jobs have been related to new office buildings. And with COVID and what has happened in the shift to mobile workforce and working from home, what will happen with commercial real estate? A very good question to ask, and I think many people are scratching their heads. I am not a big believer that it's time to, say that commercial real estate, commercial office is dead and that it will never be the same. I think we just don't know at this point. I think you could make an argument that while people are working remotely and working quite effectively remotely, just because you can do something, should you do something? To me, one of the most important things about a business is its culture. And how do you build a culture remotely? How do you build a culture through Teams meetings? And all that plays into commercial real estate. What will happen with commercial real estate over the next few years is a big question mark for all of us. But certainly, I think over the intermediate term, you're going to see a pause on large projects as everyone figures out, are people going to downsize? What does it mean? You could also make an argument that with COVID, you need to change the density within offices. So businesses could actually need more office space if they increase their density. Many more questions than answers, but commercial real estate makes me nervous. Number 5, this crisis is exacerbating a problem we already had, which is the wealth gap. If you look around, those individuals that are highly educated tend to have jobs that you can work remotely pretty darn easily. Those that are not so highly educated don't have those jobs and they're without. So we are having a widening of that gap, and that makes me nervous. And I think that plays into the social unrest that we are seeing, and for good reason. So as a community, we need to look at what can we do to not widen that wealth gap, but to shrink that down. And unfortunately, the inverse of that is happening. The wealth gap is widening in these times today. Number 6 is the equity bubble. A lot of people have asked, why in the world does the stock market continue to go up? And there's good reason. Some of the companies in the market are doing phenomenally well. Many of the e-commerce companies, for example. And you look at the valuations, and last time I looked, the valuation on the S&P 500, which is a pretty good broad range of the market, has a price earnings multiple of 28. Now that may not seem like too much, but if you look over the last roughly 40 years or so, the average for the S&P 500 has been 15. So do we really expect that earnings are going to grow that much to work their way into a normal PE ratio? And then you also look at some of the big tech companies, for example, Amazon. And I have the utmost respect for Amazon. I'm a big fan and a huge customer of Amazon. But they are now not a small company in terms of their net income. Last year, I think they earned $11 billion of after-tax net income. And Amazon is trading at a 149 times earnings multiple. Now, I think very few of us would question that Amazon is going to continue to grow their earnings. But coming from such a large base, to have a 149 price earnings multiple, it may well be justified, but I think reasonable people need to ask at one point, is it overvalued? So that keeps me up at night. Do we have an equity bubble? Is all of this influx of cash and liquidity by the Federal Reserve creating an equity bubble for us? Lastly, I'm nervous about our state budget shortfall. During the last 10 years or so, we continue to see huge increases in the amount of tax revenue to the point where our state budget for this latest biennium is $53 billion. And so we saw an increase in revenue because our economy was going all out. and then we were spending it all. And now with the impact of COVID and the economic slowdown, we're seeing a significant decrease. The last estimate I heard is we're looking at an $8 to $9 billion shortfall in terms of our budget. So what are we going to do to make up that shortfall? Are we going to cut expenditures? Are we going to raise additional revenue? And if we raise additional revenue, who are you raising that on? Are you impacting the businesses that are struggling the most? Well, if you look at that list, that's a pretty dire list, pretty depressing list. But those are all valid concerns, and I think many of you have those same concerns. Let me turn the page to what gives me hope. Why am I excited? Why am I happy to be a bank headquartered in the state of Washington with most of our loans and deposits here? Number one is the entrepreneurial nature and diverse economic base of Bellevue and Seattle. If there was ever a region, a people that can come together and figure their way through this crisis, I would bet on Seattle. I would bet on Bellevue. We have both the intellectual capital and the real dollars of capital to be able to figure this out. It is such a wonderful place. It's fun to have conversations with many of you, and it's one of the reasons I miss being in person. The hallway conversations to see what ideas people have. How are we going to get this? How are we going to change what used to be normal and adapt to this new world that we have today? So that gives me a lot of hope. I believe in the American spirit. I believe in the intellect of our people. If we have a problem, we can come together and we can solve it. Secondly, the financial strength of many borrowers and the banks. If you go back to the Great Recession in 2008, one of the key contributing factors was we were over-levered as a society. If you think about over-leverage, banks can be pretty hard on small business in terms of how much will allow you to borrow. But during the Great Recession, the financial crisis with Lehman Brothers, for example, they were levered, and they were probably the worst example, 80 to 1. That means that for every $80 of assets, they had only $1 of equity. It's really staggering if you think about it. Today, the banks are much better capitalized, and I don't just speak of Washington Federal, I speak of all the banks. The 4 banks that are over $1 trillion in assets, as well as many of the great community banks we have in Western Washington. The banks are very, very well capitalized. On average, they have 10% equity. So meaning they have only, they have, for every $10 of assets, they have $1 of equity. So that is a very strong position. The other thing banks have done is, as you've seen in this latest earnings season, banks are setting more and more aside for allowance for loan losses, future losses. Those losses haven't yet materialized, but we all believe they're on the horizon. So on average, banks have about 1.5% of their loans already reserved for, even though those losses haven't materialized. So banks are very, very well capitalized, ready to weather the storm. Also, you have many borrowers that have learned their lessons from the Great Recession and have come into this financial crisis with a very, very strong balance sheet, all kinds of liquidity, all kinds of savings for a rainy day, and the rainy day is here. So I feel very good about many of the clients that we see in this market and their position to be able to weather the storm. And I think you're seeing that with the first wave of COVID, that many of the businesses have been able to weather the shutdown that we have seen so far. But the question remains, how many gut punches can those businesses take, if you will? Residential real estate values and the equity in homes is huge. One of the things that is different, another thing that is different about this economic crisis from last time, of course, we saw real estate values just get pummeled during the Great Recession. And we're seeing just the opposite in this cycle so far, as you see people look upon density in different ways. So you have many people looking to move out to the suburbs, those that have the wherewithal to do it. And you're seeing a startup of the bidding wars again. And you need to be an all-cash buyer and no contingencies to be able to purchase real estate. So we're seeing residential real estate values increase. and we're seeing the equity amounts that clients have increase as well. For example, in our entire portfolio, we have roughly $6 billion of single-family mortgages. The loan to value on average is below 50%. That gives you a good feeling of the amount of equity that many, many borrowers have. Now, again, I acknowledge you have those that have a home and have equity and many that do not. So it's a widening of that gap. But those that are fortunate enough to own their homes are building their equity and learning the lesson from the Great Recession to not tap into all that equity, but keep the reserves. Uber low interest rates. One of the things the Federal Reserve has done is cut interest rates to near zero. And that can be a bad thing for a bank, but it can be a very, very good thing for both commercial and retail customers. So I did the math, and roughly today you can go out and get a 2.75% 30-year mortgage. And so if you had a 2.75% 30-year mortgage, and it was a $700,000 mortgage, if you compare that, if your rate was 4%, you would save almost 14%. At 4%, the mortgage on that would be $3,342 per month. At 2.75%, that same mortgage on the $700,000 is $2,858, so a 14% savings. Another way to look at it is if you kept your payment the same because of the decrease in interest rates, you could afford another $120,000 of loan and keep your payment the same. So it is really a huge boost to the real estate market, these uber low interest rates. And it also goes for commercial clients. We had a large commercial client with a very low loan to value literally get to the point where they were able to lock in a long-term interest rate that was able to save them over $800,000 a year just with the savings generated from the lower rates. So uber low interest rates will be fuel for this economy. And the other thing we have is a Federal Reserve that has taken unprecedented action in terms of talking through what their policy will be. And they will be very accommodating for the foreseeable future, and they've made that very well known. Next, I think you have a whole lot of pent-up consumer demand. I don't know about you, but for my family, it's a first world problem, but we get tired of sitting at home. We want to go out. We want to do things. We want to have experiences. And I think you have a lot of pent-up demand, consumers that are waiting to go out and buy the new furniture or upgrade their cars or go on vacations to wherever it may be. So I think there's a lot of pent-up consumer demand that if we get to a point that we can feel safe and we have COVID under control, there will be a underlying driver in the economy in terms of consumer spending. The last thing that I think gives me hope is we have seen an unprecedented level of government intervention. We can all argue about whether it was right or wrong, but they were working hard to try to get money into the hands of the people that needed it most. It's effectively a backstop. And some of you may be saying, Brent, that's a little bit hypocritical. On the other page, you talked about what scares you in the national debt, and that does scare me. And I think that my best answer is one that Warren Buffett gave recently when asked if he was worried about the national debt and the unprecedented levels of government spending. And his response was something to the effect that if you're issuing debt in another country's currency, you have a lot to be worried about. But if you're issuing debt in your own currency and you own the printing press, then you have a way to work your way out of it over time. So the government intervention that has happened to help keep people with food on their table and able to make their rent payments, I think has effectively helped us out a great deal. And they have also shown that they're willing to step up again and be helpful if that is the case. So that is big picture, kind of my thoughts. I don't know, Karen, do you want me to go through the slides at this point, or would you like to open it up to questions?
You know, Brent, we've had a couple of questions. And so I'm going to ask a couple of those right now for you.
Excellent.
So in the vein of mortgage rates, do you think they're going to stay this low, or will the massive government stimulus pop mortgage rates and we're going to see them go up?
I actually think this is likely our new normal. So I think mortgage rates in the probably 2.5% to 3.5% range will be our new normal. That's my best guess. Clearly, I'm nervous about what could happen in terms of a tail risk. The level of government intervention is something we've never seen. And so we don't know exactly how it's going to end. When the Federal Reserve decides to unwind its balance sheet, what does that happen? I think many of us were either there or have heard stories about the hyperinflation of the late 70s and early 80s, and where we saw short-term interest rates in the 20% neighborhood, and people were thrilled to get a 12% mortgage. So I think that's always in the back of our mind. But ultimately, with the Fed working hand in hand with the government to try to maneuver their way through this, I think in all likelihood, I would give it an 80% likelihood in my mind that we'll have mortgage rates in that 2.5% to 3.5% range for the foreseeable future. Karen, I can't hear you.
Tell us about the current.
Now I
Tell us
can.
about the current environment for residential real estate lending. We know that those interest rates are low. They might go up. Have banks self-employed?
You skipped out a little bit. I got most of it, so I'll try to answer that. The current environment is an unusual environment because you have this tidal wave of activity in terms of loan volume, and you have everyone working remotely, of course. So it's really, you've got a narrowed down pipeline, if you will, a pipe for these mortgages to go through. And then you have unprecedented demand. So we've even seen some banks, and this has been publicly disclosed. Wells Fargo, for example, said they will not consider doing a mortgage for someone that is not a Wells Fargo customer unless they have, I think it was 7 figures on deposit with them. So people are artificially working to slow that demand for mortgage interest rates. And it's a different process, but I think the longer rates stay lower, the more capacity that will be built over time. But it is a real issue. Capacity is a real issue out there, and you're seeing some people keep their rates a little bit artificially higher than the market rates to try to work through those capacity issues. But as everybody becomes acquainted with how are we going to work in a remote workforce, I think you'll see that capacity pick back up.
Fascinating. Thank you. Why don't you go ahead and continue on with your slide deck?
Fantastic. Okay, so now the slides that kind of support my conclusions that I went through. Here is the COVID cases as of early June, and a map of the United States. And you can see that the yellow and the orange and the red, those are bad things. And so what happened is we reopened the United States. You can compare and contrast this slide with the next slide, and you see the number of hotspots literally increased exponentially. And those are concentrated throughout the Southeast and all the hotspots that you've heard about in the news. So the question is, what can we do to open up the economy again without causing this stress on our medical system? And thus the need really to have a vaccine sooner rather than later. You can see what's happened in terms of the active cases of COVID throughout the U.S. We peaked out in early May, and then you can see what's happening. And the morning paper this morning was telling us that over 1 million cases in the U.S. So it's scary. On the positive side, hospitalization rates are lower. So whether that means some of the medical treatments are working or we're understanding it better, but hospitalization rates are lower, so that increases capacity. So that's a big positive. Here's a look at what the New York Fed Economic Index, and this chart really kind of summarizes what happened. And I would compare this to a marble falling off the table when we shut down the economy. You can see the economic index literally fell all the way down to a minus 12%, and we have started to recover, and hopefully we will continue that recovery. But the question is, what does that recovery look like? I think everyone was hopeful that it would be a V-shaped recovery. I think we're all realistic at this point. It is not going to be a V-shaped recovery. We all hope it's not a W or it goes back down severely. But what it looks like, who knows? I guess my best hope right now is it'll be kind of a checkmark economy or recovery where it went down severely, then gradually comes back up over time. Unemployment, never before in my lifetime, at least, have we seen unemployment levels like we saw. And you can see one of the strengths we were talking about last year was where we were with our unemployment rate in around Bellevue and Seattle. We were hovering right around 4%. And then with what's happened with COVID, we're up to 16%. That has started to come back down. But how long do those people, back to my comment, my summary, it's all about jobs. And if we can get the jobs back, I think we can recover quickly. If the jobs don't come back or they're very long-winded in coming back, then it will be a more prolonged recession for us. Here are the numbers, and to me, this is really staggering. And when you consider this, these are individuals like each and every one of us. But look at the total job losses per month. So in March of 2020, 25,000 job losses. April, 457,000, almost 500,000 people lost their jobs. And the other interesting thing too to think about is typically there are two people in a family or in our community for every one person working. Really only a third of US citizens are working. So then you take that third and you're cutting it back by these amounts. It's pretty regressive in terms of the impact it can have to families. But then in May, we had positive 146,000 of those jobs came back. And then in June, 71,000. So it'll be interesting to see how we do in July. I would imagine it's going to be another month like June that we slowly try to, take small bites in terms of earning back the 457,000 jobs that were lost. One of the things that also concerns me is the potential for higher taxes for the businesses that have been impacted once we get through this. Everybody knows the problems that Washington State Unemployment Agency has had in terms of security and the amount of fraud on top of the record volume of people that they've actually been helping. So the state estimates that in 2021, the employer portion of unemployment taxes will increase by 300%. And they're expected to remain at those elevated levels for several years. And that's just based on what we know today. If we have another downturn, in all likelihood, those numbers will stay higher for longer. So we have a built-in increase in taxes coming from unemployment on top of having to take care of the $9 billion deficit that we will have in state spending. One positive is how quickly retail sales have almost recovered. You can see the fall off and the comeback in retail sales, but those include online retail sales. I don't think the same would be true of either our strip malls or the large scale malls we have because of the reduced capacity. But I think this also speaks to the theory of the pent-up demand, that people are wanting to buy things, ready to buy things. They just need an avenue to be able to do that. So to me, that's a real positive, is the recovery in retail sales. Some industries are faring better than others, but some are still reeling. The industries that I worry most about are leisure and hospitality. And you can see this is a measure of jobs, and you can see what's happened to jobs in the retail industry, in restaurant or in hospitality, and also leisure. We're all the way back to levels where we were in 2002, which is right after 9/11, of course. So when do these jobs come back? When do each of us feel comfortable enough to start going out and spending nights and weekends at getaway locations that employ these members of our community? Likewise, global services is bouncing back nicely. It's amazing how we have become such a service-based economy. We are no longer the manufacturing-based economy, and the services have bounced back very nicely. The yield curve, as I mentioned, interest rates are uber low. You might look at this chart and say, wow, that's a pretty steep yield curve. But I would say, look at the y-axis. That only goes between 0 and 1.5%. Think about that. I often ask myself, I say, who is thinking that they want to invest their hard-earned money for 30 years at a rate of 1.35%? And to give you some perspective, as a bank, we're trying to look at these unusual times and circumstances and ask ourselves, how can we take advantage, likewise, for the benefit of our customers and our shareholders? So in March, after the initial impacts of COVID were made known, we looked out and we saw a lot of our borrowers were actively using their lines of credit, fully utilizing, and then taking that money. Was an unusual circumstance because they were taking the money and they were depositing it into their checking accounts. And you may say, why in the world would a good customer do that? And that's because, unfortunately, and this is probably well earned from past experience, clients are inherently distrustful of banks because they see banks routinely cutting their credit lines. There have been several articles here recently about credit cards that have been, limits have been decreased and even some credit lines canceled. But individuals and business are inherently skeptical, so they utilize that maximum credit line and then they just deposit it. And I said, wouldn't it be a cool thing if we as a bank could do the same thing? It's one thing to talk about how strong we are and how prepared we are, but it's another thing to show it. So in March of this year, we were able to borrow $1 billion for 10 years at an unbelievably low interest rate of 0.66%. Now, many of our clients on this call are probably going to use that against me and want the 0.66%. Remember, we have to make a spread. But what an unbelievable world we live in, that a bank can borrow money for a fixed rate at 0.66% for 10 years. So that's what I would encourage you to do if you're in a financial position to be able to reorganize and restructure your debt to take advantage of these low interest rates environments. I truly believe this is a generational opportunity. Hopefully it sticks around, but we'd never know how long it will stick around. Oil prices is something else that caused a great deal of concern in April. You'll recall, and I think we were all scratching our heads, and what in the world is happening with oil prices actually going negative? And it didn't make any sense. And I think that's one of my biggest fears is, what are the questions that we are not asking, that we should be asking, that we don't know to ask? And the positive here is oil prices have rebounded nicely, but still with oil prices trending around $40, many wells are not profitable to be producing at $40, but it is a whole lot better than where it was at $20 and $30. So a nice recovery on oil, and I guess my hope is for stability there. So bottom line, where do we stand? I would say the economy is strong despite COVID. If you look at GDP, Q1 was down 5%. Q2 is down 33%. The estimates are for Q3 up 20%. But that's only if COVID behaves itself. Are lockdowns coming back? I think the lockdowns are coming back, and we're seeing that. It's to what extent will we have? Will we have a stimulus round 4? Are we going to extend the unemployment benefits? Will there be specific aid to the industries impacted the most, restaurants and hospitality and leisure? What about aid to states and municipalities? At the end of the day, we still continue to get good news on the virus front. And I look at those as kind of bright spots, but we need to have a drug that can get us a vaccine, and we need to be able to distribute that massively. to really be able to calm everyone's fears and get people doing back to what they were doing before and living their lives and spending. Two of the Fed governors, Fed Governor Bernard thinks it's time for accommodation and to be very accommodative, and I applaud her for her transparency. Fed Governor Bullard is very worried about bankruptcies and default. So there is plenty of risk out there. There's probably more risk in the market today than we've seen, certainly in the last 10 years, maybe well beyond that. Just a couple of
Brent, can we take it?
Yes.
Can we take it locally again? We've had a pretty active chat, and I want to make sure that we address a couple of these local questions before we move into the hotel graph here. People want to know, what do you think about the local policies like our Seattle City Council head tax and the general political unrest that we have? How do those impact the region's economy? And is that good for us on the east side, or do we sink or swim as a region?
Yeah, I do think it will be good for the east side. I think more and more businesses are asking themselves, do we want to be headquartered in Seattle? I thought it was absolutely telling what Andy Jassy said to CNBC when someone asked them about Seattle and Seattle politics, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think he said, why would anyone either start or grow a business in Seattle with environment that's so unfriendly to businesses? So that is my biggest worry, is that we're going to compound our issues by taxing the very businesses we need to survive. I think we need to be able to grow our revenue through growth in the economy. And we have a great case study. Look what we've been able to do the last 10 years. Look what we've been able to do to tax revenue. We've taken the biennial tax revenues, from what were they, roughly $22 billion up to $50 billion. And those weren't through massive new tax measures. Those were through growth in our economy. So I think it's a very precarious time we're in, and we need to make sure we don't run off the businesses that are really the lifeblood of our economy, that are employing each and every one of us. So I'm nervous for Seattle. It appears that we have a lot of individuals that, in my mind, don't really understand the economic ecosystem and what makes Seattle run, what makes Seattle great. And we have real issues. I'm not trying to shy away from that. We have real issues that need to be addressed. We have real issues in terms of systemic racism. We have issues in terms of the wealth gap. There's all kinds of issues to be addressed. But if we're going to put forth an agenda that's aggressively taxing the very businesses we need to grow, I think that's short-sighted.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm looking at your next slide. I think it's really interesting. I used to travel for business and was at SeaTac at least twice a week, and was at a hotel room at least twice a week. And I haven't been into a hotel since that February timeframe. So tell us what's happening with our hotels and what the occupancy rates are doing.
So what I'm seeing is the hotels that have been able to open back up, and many have made the decision not to open, you're getting occupancy levels in the 40 to 50% range, which is positive. I was just in Boise last week, and the hotel was actually sold out. And they're doing things right from a social distancing standpoint. Interesting to go into a hotel room and you have a sticker over your door, so you know that it has been cleaned and no one else has been in there. But I think getting people back to traveling and doing their business will be key for hotels and our economy in general. And likewise, this is one that is staggering to me, is looking at U.S. restaurant bookings. Right, you can see that we are still down 60 to 70% in terms of restaurant bookings. And this is really not going to get back to normal until we get a vaccine, until we're all comfortable. But you'll see at the end, it's incumbent upon all of us to try to support these small businesses. I can't imagine how frustrating it would be to have the investments in the infrastructure, knowing the demand is there, and not being able to open up to serve the clients, to deliver your goods and services that people want, that will allow you to succeed. So I thought that was interesting to see what's happened with U.S. Hotel. But look at U.S. air travel. Likewise, I don't know how many have flown on flights, but very, very few flights out there. And, I think we're very, very fortunate to have Alaska Airlines headquartered here. In terms of all of the airlines, they are as well positioned in terms of their balance sheet, very conservatively managed. And if any airline makes it through, they will. And I'm very bullish on Alaska making it through. But the reality is, if we have a year without air travel, it will be a hard hit on Alaska and on everyone else. And not to mention the problems that Boeing was having beforehand. So those are the industries that are impacted the most. On the positive side, as I mentioned, look what's happening to home purchases. For so long, we had this thought process that people were going to migrate from the suburbs into downtown. It was happening. Downtowns were the place to be. And now I think a lot of people are questioning that and wondering if they, in fact, would prefer to be in the suburbs. So you're having home price purchases go up, appreciation. This is a graph. This just hammers home how great our interest rates are. Right? I look at how low our interest rates are, and I already went over the impact that can have to just one loan, a $700,000 loan. This is a graph of the Case-Shiller housing price index, and I believe this will continue to go up as there continues to be demand for homes. And that's another thing in terms of home offices. If remote workforce is a new reality, I think there's a lot of individuals that would like a different setup for their home office, and that will drive continued home sales. And then lastly, here are a couple of the slides in terms of our federal debt. That's rather negative, so I'm going to move off of that quickly. And Karen, is there any last questions, or would you like me to summarize and end?
Two last questions for you. So the first is, you talked about small businesses. What specific needs do you think small businesses will require to continue to survive? And how can we as a chamber support those small businesses?
I think the key is transparency. And if you're a small business and you're really having a problem, speak up, raise your hand. There's all kinds of great people and great organizations willing and wanting to help, but you have to kind of swallow your pride and let people know when you have a problem. And I think you'll be surprised to see how people can step up and help. One of the great things in this cycle is the regulators are encouraging us as banks to work with our clients. You'll recall in the Great Recession, that wasn't the case. So banks have been very quick to step forward with payment deferral programs for both individuals and small businesses. So if you're having a problem, don't be shy about it. Raise your hand and let people know you're having a problem. Work with your landlord, work with your suppliers, so forth, and try to work through it. But reach out to the chamber and see how you can come together and work through this. And really, that's how I would close. I think the way we're going to get through this is together, and I believe we will get through this and we'll be stronger as a result. But clearly, there's some pain being felt today, and there's probably more pain to be had. But the key for all of us to get through this is we need to go out there and we need to behave like we used to behave in terms of spending. We need to adhere to all the proper social distance and safety protocols, but we need to go out. We need to lead by example. We need to come to downtown Bellevue. We need to go to the Bellevue Collection and all the different restaurants and enjoy ourselves and start to spend the money like we used to. And that is the key to get our economy back on its feet. That's the key to keep small businesses, is actually going out, being there, creating the environment that people want to be a part of.
Brent, that's a great wrap up. And I know our office is in downtown Bellevue, and I really enjoy taking the opportunity to go shopping at lunchtime and support those small businesses, get a bite to eat, and support our retail partners. So thank you. Joe, let's have you return, and let's give a shout out to what we can do to continue to support our small businesses. So back to you, Joe.
for. But again, thanks so much to Karen and Brent. Fantastic presentation here today. Got a couple more things to clean up with before we're done. And the first, of course, is to tell you about our economic forecast breakfast, which features Joe Quinlan, the famed economist for Bank of America. Put that on your calendar. It's November 17th at 7 a.m. You won't want to miss that. We'll be sending out more registration information as we get closer to that program. Also, we want to make sure that you are ready for, I'm bringing it up on my screen. We want to make sure that we thank our sponsors, Bellevue Collection, AAA of Washington, Vulcan Real Estate, and our lunch leaders, Sweeney Conrad and Clark Newber. This is the last of our lunch series for the year, but we'll be starting up again in the fall with a whole new slate of fantastic presenters. And so make sure that you stay tuned for information about our great program. Now, before we kick it off for good, we've got a raffle that we're going to do. We are raffling off a great supply of PPE, 300 disposable masks, 100 cloth masks, and 6 bottles of the very in-demand sanitizer. And we're going to go ahead and just spin the raffle here, and our staff will get in touch with whoever the big winner is and make sure that that they get their award. That's Walter W. Oh, it's going for a spin again. It says that from time to time. Amy B. Amy B, you're the big winner. Walter, contact us. We'll give you a runner-up prize. Don't forget to wake up tomorrow morning and be with the Chamber at 8 a.m. Grab your cup of coffee and listen into the future of artificial intelligence. And until then, stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining.